Coming up next, 3 young American politicians in Islamabad, how perceptions are shaped within American politics. And a look into Afghan president's visit to India, what it means for the region. Welcome to this week's edition of Worldview from Islamabad. Here in the Pakistani capital, we often hear from senior American officials. In fact, President Bush was here just a month back. But it's not very often that we see young American politicians in Islamabad. But this changed last week when a delegation of young American political leaders, young American politicians, visited Islamabad, met with young Pakistani politicians, and held open discussions with Pakistani university students. 3 of these young American political leaders also visited the studios of PTV Network, and they came to the studio of Worldview from Islamabad, and I sat down with them and had a very interesting discussion. 3 young American politicians, 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. I sat down with Representative Hector Balderas from the New Mexico House of Representatives, and also with Representative Mark Martin from the Arkansas House of Representatives, and Senator Joyce, in fact Brian Joyce, a Democrat from Massachusetts. And it was a very interesting discussion, and it was good to get into the mindset of young American legislators and see how they're building bridges with a country like Pakistan. So I sat down with them last week and we recorded a very interesting interview. Let's watch. Your visit coincides with the reissuance of a travel advisory by the U.S. government advising U.S. citizens to exercise caution visiting Pakistan. Obviously, Islamabad is not very happy with that. We understand the reasons, of course, behind it. I wouldn't ask you really if it's justified or not, but your impression of the Pakistanis really here, the people that you met, do you think that we really need to change the way we look at each other, the way you look at us, the way we look at you?
Well, certainly, Ahmed. Let me begin. My name is Brian Joyce, and as you said, I'm with the American Council of Young Political Leaders in addition to being in the Massachusetts Senate. And for your listeners' benefit, I would just explain that this ACYPL is a nonprofit organization in the United States supported by our State Department that selects young political leaders throughout our country that have bright prospects for terrific futures in our political system and expose them to such exchanges as we're enjoying here. And let me tell you, we are enjoying it. We're delighted to be not just on this show, but here in Pakistan. So the views that we express are somewhat under development. I'm an alumni, and there are some very distinguished alumni, including 4 of President Bush's present or past cabinet members, I think 8 of our governors and 40 of our members of Congress, and these 2, as well as the other 5 individuals that have accompanied me here, I'm the escort, have bright prospects, but our experience is pretty much on domestic issues in our home states. We hope to have a greater voice in our foreign policy. But in answer to your question, have we been favorably impressed with the Pakistani people? Absolutely. Without exception, every person with whom we've had the pleasure of meeting, irrespective of their ideological beliefs, has been warm and welcoming. We've had some healthy public discourse, some a little bit higher decibel than others, but that's okay. I mean, that's healthy. I mean, we have been close friends and allies, our nations, since the beginning of this great country, and we hope that continues forever. And these exchanges help promote continued understanding. I know each of us has developed a greater understanding, and I think many of the Pakistani people with whom we've had the pleasure of meeting have had a little bit better understanding of our perspectives as well.
What do you say, Representative Balderas, about this? I mean, your stay here.
You know what, it's been fabulous. The learning curve was steep. However, the rewards that we've gained from this trip have been phenomenal. I will say this in an opinion that's developed just in the 9 and 10 days that I've been here, is I think it's imperative that both nations continue to develop strong relationships in the academic areas, in the social areas, and in the economic areas. Once we had very vibrant discussions about political policy, and we are very supportive of the military policy that's been developing. However, one of the things that I've observed that I think we can continue to develop in a positive way are the economic, the social, and the academic interests. I think Americans and Pakistani citizens have such similar interests in those areas, and I just hope that we can continue to develop those areas, and I hope that this trip was positive in that aspect.
And Representative Martin, it's only fair that I should give you also something to say.
As a resident coming from the southern part of the United States, we are very well known for our hospitality, and I would have to say that our reception and the Pakistani people, even when we're walking in the malls shopping, has been a level of hospitality and friendliness that meets or exceeds my own southern hospitality. So I think that that's something that really is stood out for me. I think that one of the things that I would like to make a point along those lines is very often we have been approached about foreign policy questions and very much current issue questions. And when I came here as a young leader that are not making those decisions right now, but maybe in the future, what I was trying to get out of the exchange was for the future, very much for the future, and how we work together as friends.
Yeah, that's true.
And one of the things that's going to be important, and I think is critical, is this type of exchange, to where we come to learn about one another, become friends, so that we can handle these issues that are now current disagreements, such that future situations will be able to be handled on a much more friendly basis than I think that they have during this current time. And I really enjoyed those occasions when I got to talk to people that were actually talking about where do we go from here, where do we go 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I think that very much of the current political topics and issues that are actually being discussed, those were for President Bush and others that have come before us. We are here for the future.
No, that's true, and we should be. And talking about the future, I don't know if you know about this. The current government, the administration of President Pervez Musharraf, one of the things that he has been trying to do for the past 5-6 years here in this country is to create new leadership. One of the reasons that politics is stagnated in our country is that somehow politics became an avenue for the elite, and sort of a new fresh blood never made it to the top. And now, I don't know, I think you met in the past week some younger Pakistani politicians.
We did. I'll tell you, first of all, the idea to promote continued democracy and more civic involvement is just a wonderful idea and a wonderful program. We did meet with the National Reconstruction Bureau, which I think is the agency that's charged, a very, very bright, competent leader that is charged with developing more grassroots democracy, more democracy at the municipal and provincial level. And that's very, very healthy. And I'm not as familiar with cricket as I might be and as President Bush pretended to be. I will use baseball parlance. You always need a farm team. You need people coming up. And that's how really our political leadership develops in our country. And that is just terrific. We had the honor and the pleasure to meet with very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We met with the Foreign Minister. We met with the Chairman of the Senate. We met with the Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee from the Senate. In fact, dozens of members of Parliament. We met with the leaders of the opposition, several opposition parties, and yet probably the most healthy discourse we had was with university students. And toward what Representative Balderas was suggesting, he puts his money where his mouth is, and he has volunteered to continue this dialogue and break down barriers of misperception, miscommunication, of misunderstanding, and he has volunteered to set up a program whereby the students can communicate here in Islamabad and in his home state of New Mexico electronically for continued discourse. And I think that's just
that's fascinating. It's very interesting. Now, Representative Balderas, talking about local government, this is also something new. I understand. I was reading your biography, and you have, you're what we call here a self-made man, somebody who rose to the top, and in a very marvelous way, really. And the reason I think, I would just assume that why you were able to do and achieve what you did is because you found a healthful environment and a political system from the grassroots that really goes to the top. That was helpful. Now, this is something that really we have not had any experience with in this country, but we're experimenting with it for the past 5-6 years, and we're beginning to see the fruits of it in the shape of, in the form of younger public servants, politicians coming up. Tell me about your experience, really. How did you rise to the top? How did you sort of beat the odds?
I was not naive to the process. One thing I quickly learned was I have to learn the rules of the game. And unfortunately, there were substantial obstacles, but once there's some predictability in the process, students or young people can begin to organize. And I challenge students here at the university level. Some of them were quick to give up and be critical of their system, and I said that they have to overcome those barriers through organization and through education. And of course learning the system and basically creating rules for that process. One of the things that I noticed that our debates began here was we right away started with national politics in our discussions. And one of the things that's been very helpful to democracy in the United States and gave rise, or one of the benefits to me succeeding, was that local government. We're very strong in the United States on local government. Your local common man become the mayor of the village. Your local youngster from a small village can go and represent his state in the New Mexico Legislature. And
Representative, that's exactly what we're beginning to see in our country as well. One more question relevant to that is,
sure.
How did you also deal with the what I would say what I would call the vested interest? I mean, people who are entrenched, who have been in politics in your area, for example, for many, many decades, and saw you, for example, trying to come up and break through the system.
To be quite honest with you, I do practice pragmatic politics. Young people have to become aware that they'll always have to balance those interests. But nobody gives power to anybody. Unfortunately, I had to run. I was told not to run. Was told several times you don't have a chance. And so once I became successful to an extent, the party started embracing me more, and there was a balancing.
Senator,
if I might add on to this, because through hard work, you can succeed. And our system is set up so that if you look at our presidents, certainly President Bush came from means, but prior to him, President Clinton, President Bush before him, but President Carter, President Reagan, President Johnson, all men of humble beginnings, and just get involved. And so the grassroots democracy that's taken place in this country is very, very enheartening and very encouraging.
That's interesting. Now, Senator, one more thing that a lot of people here in Pakistan are interested in, people who watch American politics, the way a policy is made in Washington. Of course, I understand now all of you are representing yourselves.
Sure.
Any question that I ask here, I do not intend to get a policy statement out of any one of you. But I'm just curious. I'm sure a lot of my viewers are, especially the younger ones, and I can tell you a lot of young aspiring politicians do watch our program.
Well, there's an expression in our country that lawmaking is a little bit like making sausages. It's a very ugly process when you watch it, but the end product's usually pretty good in a democracy. And so too with respect to most of our policies, that it can be messy in the making, but through open, honest debate from competing viewpoints, typically the end product is pretty good. With respect to Pakistani-American relations, my God, there's so much more that unites us than divides us. I mean, we have so much more in common, but the focus is always on things that we disagree. Any brothers disagree and sometimes even get angry with one another, but for the most part, brothers love one another and are in agreement with most of their beliefs, and I think so too the relations between our countries. And within our Congress, within our state legislatures, I think all of us, as we make decisions, they are certainly impacted by our life experiences. And the three of us, as well as our four colleagues that aren't here, have all been positively impacted by our trip to Pakistan. So might that someday shape our vantage point? Certainly, yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, Representative Martin, you are active with some Christian organizations.
That's correct.
Now, that is really very fascinating for many of us here because, of course, we all followed the campaign of President Bush when he was elected the first time in 2000, and we all watched the rise of the religious right. I don't know if that's what you call it back in the U.S., but tell me about your constituency. I mean, the Christian organizations. How influential are they? And we in Pakistan, of course, get our impressions of the U.S. from Hollywood movies. Now, I understand Hollywood does not reflect or portray, for example, that part of America that is religious. Introduce that part of America to me.
And you're correct. Hollywood does not very often represent, and sometimes negatively represents, the Christian or most any other religious viewpoint. I will say, I, in particular, as a Baptist denomination of the Christian faith, we have been traditionally fiercely independent in the boundaries that we put between government and the church, or the governance of the church. We hold to the belief that that the Congress shouldn't make laws respecting a particular religion or interfere with the free exercise of religion. That being said, as a Christian, we very much believe that our beliefs enter into every part of our lives, including participation in the politics.
Just to understand where we connect here, I mean, how we see things. For example, we had a very passionate debate over the past few months here in Pakistan and in the region, for example, about an issue such as the cartoons. In our country, for example, in Pakistan, we ban any portrayal of any of the prophets, Prophet Muhammad, Moses, Jesus. We do not allow that. How do you see, I mean, we understand how Europe sees that. How does the American religious right see things like that?
I'll just use a particular example that I personally found quite offensive. Recently, in a New York art show, a cross was turned upside down into a jar of urine, and that was considered art. From my perspective and others in the Christian faith, that I participate with, and most others I believe it, although we're highly offended at that, I believe it is that artist's right to do so. And I personally believe that I would defend, as a legislator, the right to do so.
And may I just add to that, I come from Massachusetts. Plymouth is where the Pilgrims landed and founded our country, and it was founded on really on the issue of religious tolerance. So we have a very clear separation between church and state. I happen to be a Catholic, and certainly just as our trip to Pakistan, our life experiences, our religious beliefs are all part of what we bring to our positions as lawmakers. And because we have such a healthy democracy, we have people from all different vantage points, and together, that's why I said sometimes the sausage making or the law making is messy, but the end product's usually pretty good. And we are a representative democracy, and it represents the cross-section of America. But we have a absolutely are united, and it's embedded in not only in our culture, but in our law, for respect for religious beliefs, respect for each other. And certainly, I think the President of the United States could not possibly have been clearer in our outrage and our disgust at the blasphemous cartoon. There was no misunderstanding whatsoever. The American president, and I think the American people, were very, very clear.
And it's a great thing that we share these kind of values the Pakistanis and the Americans. Just a personal question: do you feel?
I want to be very clear that there was
no, I understand that.
no tolerance at all for that Danish
we
cartoon.
actually were really impressed with the position taken by the U.S. government and the U.S. president. Now, we also feel here in Pakistan that the Americans, and this should be actually one of the things that should bring us closer, that we have respect for religious values, and certainly Christianity and Islam, frankly, for the most part, really are not very different from each other.
We have an awful lot in my district. We have continuous interfaith dialogue. We have the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, where persons of various Muslim, Christian, Jewish, various ideologies and faiths and beliefs sit down, and each tries to understand one another. We had an incident in my district just prior to my departure where at a Jewish community center, some probably kids put swastikas up defacing property. And I met we had 300 people from all faiths, including Muslims, show up and united in our contempt for this action. And
now, is it true that the Americans are more religious than the Europeans? Do you feel that?
I think studies have shown that the American people are more religious than perhaps is commonly believed. We just
certainly more religious than what Hollywood shows.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a movie. A movie is fantasy.
Yeah.
A movie is escapism, and fantasy, not reality. Reality. If we were to film the day-to-day drudgery of my life, or Hector or Mark's lives, it might not be as exciting and might not score $200 million at the box office. So we need to add a little fantasy.
Sure. Immigration is one of the things that we also in this country are watching in a fascinated way, of course. One of the endearing things about the United States, about your country, is that you have this tradition of that you debate all the major issues. Sure, you have something to say.
To show how a young person can have the courage of his conviction and break with his party. Hector Balderas is an immigrant that or his parents has natural affinity and would, as a Democrat like me, be expected to support the downtrodden, and that's the commonly held belief, and he certainly is a leader in that regard. This guy here broke with many of his supporters because he had a belief and had the courage of his conviction, and now is when we return home is being challenged by a more conservative and perhaps less tolerant member of his own faction of our political system.
So your diversity is part of your strength,
Yes.
and we here in Pakistan, of course, are proud to have the American people and certainly the U.S. government as our friends, one of our stronger friends. We don't forget the fact that the American people were the largest contributors to the relief effort during and after the earthquake.
Forget about the hundreds of millions of dollars from the government, but the $100 million from American individuals who reached into their pockets so as to help their friends in Pakistan. I think that was the best example of American values and respect for our friends in Pakistan. And to those friends who have welcomed us on this journey, we say thank you very much.
That was my interview with 3 young American politicians trying to build bridges with Pakistan, and that should bode well for the future relationship between both countries. Coming up next, we're going to look into the visit of Afghan President Ahmed Quraishi to India. And my guest in the next segment is Shireen Mazari, a renowned Pakistani defense analyst, and that's coming up next. Stay with us. And a look into Afghan President's visit to India, what it means for the region. Last week, Afghan President Ahmed Quraishi paid a visit, or concluded a visit, to India. And this visit, of course, enhanced the already very close cooperation between Afghanistan and India. India, of course, has been involved in Afghanistan very closely, very strongly since 2001. President Bush, for example, when he visited India last month, made it a point to even highlight the Indian role in Afghanistan. Joining me to talk about this is Shireen Mazari, the renowned defense analyst, and I thank you very much for being here with us. Let me begin with the first question. There's nothing absurd, of course, about a visit by an Afghan president to India. There's nothing wrong with that. But the interesting thing is it comes immediately after the diplomatic squabble between Kabul and Islamabad over that intelligence list that the Afghans provided us, and it turned out not to be very accurate, to say the least. Now, is there something for people like me, journalists like me and you, that we could smell in the air in this visit?
Well, you know, India is, of course, using Afghanistan to further its ambitions in the region and to go beyond South Asia into Central Asia and West Asia. This was very clear. But what is interesting about this particular visit is the way President Karzai sort of echoed everything that his host was saying, demanding that, although he didn't use the word demand, but effectively saying that Pakistan must give India transit rights so that Indian goods can be transited across Pakistan into Afghanistan, and that would lead somehow to the development of South Asia and Central Asia and so on. Now, this Mr. Karzai...
Is this the first time that he endorsed this Indian position that we shouldn't link this roots thing to the resolution of Kashmir? And
No, I don't think that it's so much the first time, but Mr. Karzai has been basically agreeing to whatever the Indians have been asking him to do. But it's a little absurd because, you know, Mr. Karzai must be a dreamer, because with the instability that exists in Afghanistan, he can hardly talk about any opening up of trade routes, any sort of routes whatsoever. And in any case, it is not sort of incumbent upon us to give India these transit rights into Afghanistan. And in any case, we have our own interests in Central Asia, and why wouldn't we want to further our trade once Afghanistan is stabilized? But unless Afghanistan is stable, it's foolish to talk about these things. It's just, I think, in a way, what Manmohan Singh was doing was getting Karzai to put us in a spot. But it's a foolish thing, because we are not in a spot. I mean, let's see what happens. Let Mr. Karzai stabilize his own country first. Let him at least spread his governance.
One positive thing that
Kabul.
a lot of people noticed, of course, during this visit, that none of the Afghan officials accompanying the Afghan president did say anything about Pakistan that would the Pakistanis would not like. Indeed, the Afghan president himself kept repeating, whenever referring to Pakistan, he kept saying our Pakistani brothers and so forth. So, I mean, that was a positive thing. The Afghans are careful about it.
Well, look, they need to be. I mean, Mr. Karzai has enjoyed the hospitality of the state of Pakistan for many years, and his family has done likewise. We have been hosting Afghan refugees interminably, it seems, and continue to do so. We are putting our Pakistani lives at risk as being a frontline state in the war on terror. But he doesn't have to be, so he can't afford to be openly abusive of Pakistan. But what he said, look, read behind what is being said. He says, yes, Pakistan, India and Afghanistan should jointly fight militancy. What does he mean, jointly fight? I mean, what does India have to do with the war that we are fighting in on the borders of Pakistan and Afghanistan? Then, of course, this whole trade issue. This is trying to put subtle pressure on Pakistan, and it should be totally unacceptable to us.
Indirect pressure. An indirect pressure.
Indirect pressure, and I think a bit presumptuous and arrogant, frankly, of Mr. Karzai to suggest that we should allow India this right, or that India is owed this right as a routine matter. This is not so. It is our prerogative whether we choose to or we don't. And the other important issue, I think, which we should be wary about, is that Mr. Karzai has done something very strange. He has allowed a foreign government, that is the Indian government, to put 300 special forces in Afghanistan around the area of Kandahar, near the sensitive border with Pakistan, and the ostensible excuse is that these troops are there to protect the Indians involved in the reconstruction
Indian
effort.
companies and all
But this is extremely stupid, because if this logic is applied, then every country whose workers or whose businessmen are in Afghanistan for reconstruction, should they send accompanying special forces to
Let
protect
me come to
them?
the Indian
This
consulates
is
as well.
stupid.
The Indian consulates, many Pakistani officials have been complaining
Yes.
about this, the very fact that they're
Six
very close,
consulates.
6 consulates, and they're very close to the Pakistani border. Do you think
And
this
where
is
India has no real interest to
Interest,
open them,
exactly.
and they are manned not by 1 or 2 people, but by at least 15, 20, 30 people. Now, it is very clear that India, after securing the western border with the eastern border with Pakistan, is quite prepared to conduct low intensity operations across our western borders through Afghanistan. Earlier we had a problem with the Indian consulate in Zaidan, and we complained, and everybody knows, and the Pakistan government has now started saying openly that yes, the Indians are getting active in Balochistan, are involved. So in that situation, then we need to be a little more aggressive in telling Mr. Karzai to get rid of the 300 special forces Indian troops that are there, because it makes no sense at all to have
of course,
these people.
Pakistani officials did raise the question of the Indian consulates. Do you think this was something that the Afghan president during his visit discussed with his Indian counterpart?
I doubt it. There's no sign at all to show that Mr. Karzai raised any of the concerns that we have expressed to
What kind of
him.
a sign you would be looking for as an observer?
Well, and it should have come out in the press conference of the issues that were discussed, and there was no mention made of Pakistani concerns vis-a-vis India in Afghanistan. I think Mr. Karzai, I don't know what game Mr. Karzai was playing. Was he trying to indirectly pressurize us? That was foolish. We're not going to come under pressure by these sort of antics. What was he trying to do? It doesn't make sense at all.
Tell us something about the Indian role in Afghanistan since 2001. It's really very widespread. I mean, for President
It
Bush to
is.
come here and actually say, he said in one breath, actually, if you recall, he mentioned India and he said India is playing a very active role in Afghanistan, and Pakistan also, he said in the same breath, and Pakistan also has a very big role to play. But where? Not in Afghanistan, in the wider greater Middle East.
I'm glad Mr. Bush acknowledged that India was playing a very active role in Afghanistan. The question is, what activity are they doing? What is the role? And it's a very dangerous and a negative role, frankly, because they are using Afghanistan for all manner of political intrigues and of intervention in Pakistan.
What is the Afghan interest, if you could just dissect this thing? What is the Afghan interest? Of course, when I say the Afghan interest, I'm not talking about a single entity. We have, of course, different interest groups within Afghanistan. If you could just briefly shed a light on that.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because what is the Afghan interest? Are we talking about the Karzai government's interest? You have to remember that the Karzai government, when it came into being, was primarily a Northern Alliance government. And we know that the Northern Alliance for many years was backed, funded and supported by India. Mr. Abdullah, the venom that he spewed against Pakistan eventually became so ridiculous that he had to be removed from the foreign minister's post. But the new man is a communist. So he knows that we supported the anti-communist Afghan struggle against the Soviet occupation. So he's not going to be very well disposed. So there are very hostile forces at the moment to hold power in Kabul.
But as far as the new foreign minister is concerned, we have not seen anything.
No, we haven't, but we should
Yeah.
not expect particularly friendly overtures, I think, given the past. But they will be a little more cautious, because we made it very clear that we were not prepared
about
to
the other-
tolerate the shenanigans of
What about,
Abdullah
for
Abdullah.
example, these terrorist organizations that we suddenly sprung up inside Pakistan, like the so-called Balochistan Liberation Army, the BLA and all? We all know, of course, it was something that was created by the Soviets back during the Cold War.
You know that India and the Soviet Union have had very close links on a number of issues, and they were very close to the old Afghan regime. It would be one explanation of why the 300 Indian special forces are there. Are they training these people? So I think Mr. Karzai needs to take a long, hard look, because it is not in Afghanistan's interests to antagonize
But you know,
Pakistan.
when
We are a
yeah.
direct neighbor.
True, but when we talk about these things, for example, the BLA and all this stuff, you know, I met some, for example, American academics, and you keep meeting them regularly. They somehow tend to, and I'm talking about independent people not associated with government, they tend to really sort of look with disbelief at the arguments that we give, for example, about the BLA and the Indian role, potentially anti-Pakistan activities directed at us. They tend to think that the Indians would not really want to be involved in these kind of
Look,
things.
the Americans want to cover their tracks also. I have a lot of problems. I have a big question mark on what the Americans may or may not be doing in our region. After all, we know that they're trying to bring about regime change in Iran. And this is not a secret. I mean, the Americans have allocated funds for it, and it's been given out in the open. So if that be the case, then what exactly is their linkage with the Indians in Balochistan?
I know that you're not very positively predisposed toward many of the, let's say, peace, I wouldn't say concessions, but many people might call them that, that we've made the peace offers, the peace overtures we made to India. My question is, if we really have done that, the Indians should be looking at that very positively. Why would they get involved in things like what they're doing in
Because the
Afghanistan?
Indians maybe have misread us and have felt that because we are prepared to make certain gestures for peace in the region, that we are coming from a position of weakness. That is not the case. We have enough confidence now as a nation to be able to make certain gestures. The Indians have misread them. The Indians have also developed a new arrogance after the Bush visit. Let's be very clear. They feel that they can now sort of dictate terms on a number of issues, and I think this is unfortunate. But I do feel that we should have given observer status to Afghanistan initially into SAARC rather than immediately giving them membership of SAARC. I think that perhaps we were hasty on that. But fine, I mean, it doesn't, we can contain the situation. I think we can defend our own interests. But you see, if we are going to be supportive of Afghanistan on all fronts, we are going to be nice to India, then the time has come for some reciprocity from both India and Afghanistan. And I don't see that at the moment, unfortunately.
Very quickly, the Americans, are they playing a role in bringing us and the Afghans closer? I mean, the governments, any positive progress on that front?
I don't know what the Americans are trying to do. I think the Americans are very confused about what they should be doing in Afghanistan. That is why their policies are a bit askew. And that is why they've not been able to restore some sort of stability so far in Afghanistan, despite all the funding and all the military strength that they have brought to bear in Afghanistan.
Shireen Mazari, renowned Pakistani defense analyst, thank you very much for being with us. This concludes, of course, the discussion of the background to the visit to India by Afghan President Ahmed Quraishi. Let me move on now to the emails, and I received an email from Mohammed Tufail from Mardan, from Northwest Frontier Province, and he writes, I'm a student of MA English. I have a good taste for politics. I am busy in my studies, but I do watch your program. Please arrange an interview with President Musharraf on the situation in Balochistan and in some parts of Northwest Frontier Province. This is an issue that we are following very closely. Thank you, Mohammed Tufail from Mardan. Of course, we focus in our program mostly on foreign affairs, but this is a question which, of course, has a foreign dimension. We will, of course, try to arrange and do a discussion or a report on this in our future editions. We'll do that. So thank you very much, Mohammed Tufail, again from Mardan. Keep sending us your emails. You can write to us on worldview@ptv.com.pk. We try our best, of course, to read out your emails in the program, and we'll continue to do that. We'll meet you again next week, same day, same time. And until then, it's Allah Hafiz from here.